set up. I'm all set up, and I appreciate being with you.
It's so good to have you, Walter. I'm especially excited because one of the themes that I like to push on X is truth and transparency. And I've read four of your books cover to cover. I'm most of the way through the Elon Musk book, but it strikes me how, you really get down into the good, the bad, and the ugly. And wondering if that's like how did that become important to you, Walter, to get into the truth and balance as you're telling these stories?
I'm here in New Orleans where I grew up, and there are really a couple of types of people come out of New Orleans: preachers and storytellers. And I've noticed nowadays the world's got far too many preachers, as one of my mentors once said. And sometimes you need people who don't have a particular agenda, but they're going to get out there. They're going to report something. They're going to try to get it right. And then people can form their own opinions. But I think in this day and age of talk radio and cable TV shout shows, and sometimes the sort of inflamed discourse you see online, uh, people are more interested in shouting their opinions than going out and finding out what the story is and reporting it. So when I got the opportunity to talk to Musk couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, about doing a book, I said, I want to do a book, but I don't want it based on 5 or 10 interviews. I don't want to be based on, just having a few conversations. I want to be able to be right by your side week in and week out, whenever I want, for a couple of years, morning, noon, and night. And he said yes. And I think it's because he's remarkably transparent for good and for bad. He said, don't leave anything out, don't whitewash it. He'd put nothing off limits. And that radical transparency is something I don't think we've ever seen in a biography subject recently. The last time it may have happened was when Dr. Johnson let Boswell hang around with him. So I applaud Musk for the transparency and for the fact that, as you said, there's some stories in there that I try to tell straight that are show his darker side or his angry side at times. But also, what people don't know is how amazing his engineering side is, how amazing his focus is, and we're not very good as a society either at holding two things in your head at once. That somebody could be totally amazing in some ways, but also could say things that you might disagree with or not be good in certain other areas. And so I want somebody to get an unvarnished view of Elon Musk. And the second thing that amazed me when we had our conversation is after he told me I could be around him, take notes, be in any meeting, do whatever I want, walk the factory lines with him, be there late at night at the Starbase launch site or in Twitter headquarters. Um, I said, yeah, but I don't want you to have control over this book. I'm not even going to let you read it in advance. You won't get it before it's published. And he went, okay, I get it. It should be unvarnished.
That's such a special process that you were able to go through there. I want everyone to know I'm going to plan 15 minutes at the end of this interview to ask questions from the audience. If you would like to
Hey, be more
participate in
generous.
that,
Be more generous. Give people a little bit more time. I'll say an extra 10, 15, 20 minutes.
oh, wonderful.
These
All
these
right.
people
Well,
want to talk, and they deserve to talk, and they're talking about an interesting, smart, good dude. And I think one of the amazing things about Spaces X Spaces on X is how democratizing it is. I just had an interview with some people probably don't like Musk that much from a company called Vox. I'll say it. And it's like, isn't he messing up Twitter? I said, wait a minute. I'm looking at the platform X right now, and there's a spaces where people are discussing Hamas and Israel with thousands of people in it. There's citizen journalists on there who are posting things and even getting paid for it. So this democratization that Musk and Linda Yaccarino have allowed for this platform is so cool.
I couldn't agree more, Walter. It's absolutely incredible what Spaces offers, hosts and participants in general. There's nothing like it, really. Podcasts are sort of wonderful conversations between individuals, but it's great to be able to
Yeah,
bring
you
up the
remember
audience along.
Clubhouse where they tried to do it? When people tell me about Musk, he can't, he doesn't have a. I say, how come Clubhouse didn't work? How come I can name 7 or 8 others? And yet Spaces works. And for that matter, I think it's going to be somewhere between WeChat and Substack and so many other everything apps, PayPal, that he's just adding features that will surprise people.
Yeah, I love Spaces. I mean, I'm dedicating a lot of my energy into growing my following on Spaces, getting great people like you to interview here, and that you really hit the nail on the head on exactly why. The democratization of it is just unlike anywhere else. I hope that they're able to bring video and other features and just continue to grow Spaces and the rest of X. Uh, Let
But
me
not
ask
to
a
sugarcoat things, because, I mean, let's make this a discussion. I also think you have to be careful to make sure the environment's not too toxic. And I don't agree that I think there was always toxic content on Twitter well before Elon Musk bought it. But I think, that's still a challenge. And I think the authentication of users will help. I think getting rid of bots and trolls will help. But we have to make it a place where civil discourse is amplified and enabled rather than spiteful, hateful discourse.
I couldn't agree more. Another theme of mine. I think we agree on a lot of things. Walter, I'd love to dig into your early childhood, if that's okay. I know,
I'm sitting here in New Orleans, 2 blocks from where I was born, so I guess it's a good time to do it.
yeah, that's so cool. Have you spent your entire life in New Orleans? And tell me some stories about your early childhood, if you would.
Well, I was born and raised in New Orleans, and I'm back in New Orleans. I did venture forth like Don Quixote riding with a lance at his side to work at Time Magazine in New York and work in Washington and work at CNN in Atlanta. So I'm sort of that mainstream media of the 80s and 90s that everybody now hates. And I worked at the Aspen Institute. So I've lived all over the place, but I've always kept a foot in New Orleans because for me, it's useful to be grounded in home. I mean, some people don't have, and Elon Musk really doesn't have that luxury of saying, I'm grounded in Pretoria, South Africa. But for me, when I'm back here where I grew up, I was just talking to a friend I've known since kindergarten who was telling me some things I was doing wrong. I know I got real friends who have known me forever. I also have a community here that's creative and beautiful, but also challenge. I mean, New Orleans has got some challenges, and I like being able to go home and deal with those challenges. I grew up with Michael Lewis, who you all may have heard of, who has a book out this week called on Sam Bankman Fried. We both went to the same school. We were kind of the famous graduates of the school until Eli Manning and Peyton Manning and then Arch Manning graduated from the school, and now they hardly remember us. But I had a very magical childhood. Um, my parents were the nicest people I've ever known and the smartest people I've ever known. Musk had a much more traumatic childhood in South Africa, especially with a father who was at least psychologically rough and abusive on him. And he grew up lonely. He didn't make friends all that naturally. He says he had Asperger's. And so I think there were certain things that were instilled in him as a child, such as um, he's much more fearless than I am. He's much more of a risk taker than I am. And he's sometimes rougher than I am. I try to be empathetic, but sometimes it crosses the line, my desire to be empathetic, and it's just me craving to be liked by people, which is why I was not a great person managing CNN, because it needed to be disrupted and I was craving everybody to like me. So I try to be self-aware about my childhood. And uh, the fact is, my childhood made me very happy, and I think a pretty good storyteller. I like listening to other people, but I'll never be somebody as driven as Elon Musk, who's shooting rockets to Mars and bringing us into the era of electric vehicles.
Yeah, not many of us can be quite that motivated. I don't think there's only one Musk.
But we can
Did
have
you?
the good fortune of writing about him and allowing him, having him allow us into the roller coaster he's riding.
Speaking of, when did you know that you wanted to be a writer? What did you want to do when you were growing up?
I had a mentor I mentioned earlier who talked about be a storyteller, not be a preacher, who was named Walker Percy. And I doubt there's anybody on this spaces who remembers who Walker Percy was, but he was a great novelist. And when I was a kid, we used to go, he lived on a bayou called the Bogafalaya, just north of Lake Pontchartrain from New Orleans. And we'd go there on weekends to water ski and hunt and catch turtles and fish. And we spent a lot of time. His daughter was a friend our age. And I always asked Ann Percy, what does your dad do? He's always sitting on the dock drinking bourbon and eating hogshead cheese. And she said, he's a writer. And I was like 12. I didn't know what it meant to be a writer. I mean, I know you could be an engineer like my dad and uncles were, or you could be a fisherman, or you could be a doctor. But finally, one day, I read The Moviegoer, which is a book that came out when I was about 12 or 13 years old. And I realized that you can tell the important moral lessons we want to do and the important inspirational lessons. You can convey those almost like the Bible does through storytelling. And that's when I said, okay, I want to be a storyteller.
That's awesome. Do you have any stories about family traditions or anything that happened in your youth that influenced your path?
Well, one of the things that influenced me a lot, as I said, was that my father was the kindest person and the smartest person I knew. And he was a great engineer. And he believed in what we sometimes called the hands on imperative. You had to have your hands on to things. So I remember, and this is the old days when you could open up the hood of a car and, change the oil and change the spark plugs and tune it up and juice it up. And I remember when you could open the back of radios and television sets and see the circuits. And even I'm old enough to remember vacuum tubes and testing them. And so he taught me to learn to love hardware and circuitry and to understand how logic is like done, yes, no logic, Boolean algebra is done through on off switches. And I think younger people now, including my daughter, they love coding, but they don't have a feel for the hardware. They don't have a feel for engineering. They don't have a feel for materials. So I love growing up in the basement workshop, separating the transistors from the capacitors and the resistors, and using a soldering iron and making things with Heath kits. And that's one of my great childhood memories. Of course, I've got other memories of growing up in New Orleans with friends going to Bourbon Street, but those aren't polite enough for a podcast.
I think probably a lot of the people in the audience would love to hear those stories about Bourbon Street, but I had no idea that you did things like building these engineering projects. Did you ever aspire at any time to be an engineer like your father, or was there any particular type of engineering that was exceptionally interesting to you?
It was a mistake for me not to pursue that. I don't want to brag, but in high school, I came in second in a National Science Foundation science project thingy. So I was kind of on that path. And I went to college. I studied the history of science, but I was much more of a humanities person. And even though I loved math and I loved physics, those days you go to college, and if you're not really going to major in physics, the physics department isn't that welcoming and that friendly. And so I went down a social sciences and humanities path. And if I had to do it all over again, I would do the sciences, not actually engineering, but biotechnology. I would have studied the life sciences more because I find those fascinating. I wrote a book not quite as popular as my book on Elon Musk, recently called The Code Breaker. And it was about Jennifer Doudna, who co-invented the technology known as CRISPR that allows us to use guide RNA to edit our genes, edit our DNA. So I think there are really three great revolutions of our time. Steve Jobs, who I wrote about, helps bring us into the era of the digital revolution with friendly computers and smartphones. Jennifer Doudna brought us into the era of life sciences revolution, along with her colleagues. And Elon Musk, along with some others, but mainly driven by Elon Musk himself, has brought us into the era of renewed space travel, sustainable energy with electric vehicles and solar roofs and battery packs. And now, I hope, uh, safe artificial intelligence and robotics.
Can you tell us anything more about that science fair project? I'd love to hear what you did to get second place.
Actually, I did two of them. One, my father, as I said, is an engineer, and his main engineering was electrical engineering. And I took different types of light. Back then there were fluorescent lights and incandescent lights and mercury vapor lights and sodium vapor lights, and did a spectral analysis of the wavelengths and spectrums and compared them to natural light and why people hated or fluorescent lights, for example. And I also then took ultraviolet lights and irradiated a poor sets of milk bottles filled with Drosophila, fruit flies, and tried to recreate Mendel's experiments about mutations and changes and inherited things where you could and how much faster radiation made fruit flies mutate, none of which is necessary in this world today. And I'd half forgotten them until you asked me.
Well, I'm glad we were able to resurrect that. I think probably your background doing these sort of sciences helped you do an even better job writing your biography of Elon. I'm curious, as you went through that process, did writing a book about Elon and following Elon around, did that change your own sort of like core beliefs at all? Is there anything that happened along that journey that helped form you as the future Walter?
Well, it's kind of early to tell since the book was just published, but yes, I think every time I write a biography, there's lessons to be learned. Otherwise, you wouldn't write the biography. And one of the lessons I learned early on with Steve Jobs is something we just talked about, which is standing at the intersection of the sciences and the humanities. Jobs would always show that street sign of the arts and uh, technology intersecting and saying that's where creativity occurs. And I've decided to focus my career on writing books about people at that intersection. Uh, Jobs told me the ultimate was Leonardo da Vinci, so I did him. But I think people are sometimes too intimidated by science and engineering. So I want to explain the beauty and the magic of somebody like Elon Musk, who can look at stainless steel or Inconel or a carbon fiber composite and almost have a visual feel for the properties of those materials. I think we should all engage much more with science. When it comes to a specific lesson from Musk, if it was a simple how to book, it would have been 5 pages, and it's not. But I'll just give one lesson, which is what surprised me about Musk is that he's become the richest person, on earth off and on, but it wasn't because he set out to make money. If you're going to set out to make money, you don't start a rocket company. You don't start an EV company. You don't buy Twitter. And what he sets out with are certain missions that come from his childhood, sitting in the corner of the library, reading the comic books and reading the sci fi. And he comes up with three missions. One is that human consciousness is a beautiful, fragile thing, and we have to nurture it. And among the ways to do that is for us to become a spacefaring species, go to other planets. Number two was we have to have a sustainable planet. And so his big mission becomes electric vehicles, solar roofs, and the other things. And his third great mission, from reading Isaac Asimov's robot stories maybe once too often, was our robots could turn on us if we don't have the guardrails. So we have to make sure artificial intelligence is a benefit not a harm, to humanity. And those three great missions cause him to start these companies. And eventually he backfills by saying, and here's the way we can make money. We can launch satellites and recreate the internet in low Earth orbit, or we can help cure paralysis, or we can make a global car that sell 1 million Teslas a year. Um, but I guess I came out of it asking myself, what are my missions? Not what are my little goals, and not what's my little passion these days. I teach at Tulane, and there are too many speeches there about follow your passion. Well, it's not about your stupid little passion. It's about connecting your passion to a higher mission. And that's what I've learned from writing this book.
So, can you share what your mission is, Walter? Mission is like my primary subject for a long time. My tagline was just mission, mission, mission. I'd love to hear what your mission is.
Well, one thing is it's to be able to describe the missions of people who have more of an impact on the world than I have, whether it be Steve Jobs, Jennifer Doudna, Elon Musk, or Leonardo da Vinci. Because I think if I tell the stories of people who have great missions and learn how to execute, because mission without execution is just hallucination. So one of the things Musk is able to do is not only have a vision of a great electric vehicle, but know how to execute by building factories and assembly lines that can churn them out or churn out the SpaceX Falcon rockets. So my mission is not as noble as getting us to Mars or transforming the life sciences with gene editing. But my mission is to tell you the story of these people and how they did it, and in order to inspire the next generation. I mean, I'm here in New Orleans, just did an event last night and then one the night before. Lots of young people come. It was really a few hundred people. It was kind of nice, big events. And so many people came up to me and they said, my life was transformed when I read your Steve Jobs book. I decided to go into what I'm doing. Or my life was transformed when I read, a young girl say, I didn't know girls could be scientists. And now I'm going to be a biochemist. So I may not transform the world, but hopefully I'm going to inspire a very large generation of people who will transform the world.
Inspiration through education. I love it, Walter. So I have one quick sort of funny question for you. Greg is in the audience, and he wanted to know what your favorite type of Oreo is.
I know I follow Greg. I hate to say it because this is not an exact answer, but I crave those peanut butter with cheese crackers that are an ersatz Oreo. I'm not deeply into chocolate and sugar as much as I am to peanut butter and cheese.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't agree more. I'm definitely a savory guy. Let's talk about your
But in
hobbies.
New Orleans, we don't eat junk food. We eat oyster po' boys.
Oh wow, those sound good. I need to get to New Orleans sometime. I want to talk a little bit about New Orleans actually, but first, do you have any hobbies, or what do you do in your spare time? And did you have to like sort of drop those when you were working with Elon?
Well, I love to travel, and my wife Kathy and I, in a couple of weeks after these book events are over, we're going to London and Amsterdam. I love to teach. I know that doesn't sound like a hobby. It makes me sound like a nerd. But one of the really cool things that happened in my life is after I left Time, CNN, Aspen Institute, I've been involved in many things, including writing the books. But I teach a course in the digital revolution at Tulane, and then I teach a course in American history through the law. And that recharges my battery. It energizes me. It restores my faith. I go to Washington, D.C. and watch the clown show happening there. And I go, oh my God, where are we going? But I get back to my class and I teach, and it's good. And once again, a nerd like, or it sounds like, well, uh, a hobby, but it's not really a hobby. I throw myself into the problems here in New Orleans. I've been on the City Planning Commission, the Louisiana Recovery Authority after the hurricane. I worry about zoning things. I think in life, after you've had some success, it's important to become part of a community and see what you can do to help bring people together in the community, help tone down some of the poison, and help be practical and fix problems. So uh, that's why being back in home in New Orleans is like my supercharger.
In all of your travels, Walter, what other sort of cities do you enjoy the most? And also, what is it about New Orleans that brings you back home? Like, what is unique so much about New Orleans after having seen much of the world?
When I write about creativity, you think of creative people like Leonardo da Vinci or Ben Franklin or whatever. But there's also an aspect of it that I call the cradles of creativity, the places that nurture creativity. And you see them throughout history. Perhaps the greatest was Florence in, around the time of 1500. That was diverse. It had people who had come in from the fall of Constantinople, bringing algebra, people from North Africa. It was a trading route. So people from Mongolia and Asia were there. And it was diverse in that community. So you get an awkward kid, and some of the people I've written about have been awkward kids, from the village of Vinci named Leonardo, who was born out of wedlock. His father refuses to legitimate him. He's gay, he's left handed, he's distracted. Uh, and yet he goes from the village of Vinci to the town of Florence and he flourishes. So, what is it about Florence that makes it the cradle that nurtures the Renaissance? Well, it's partly the diversity and it's partly the tolerance. And that can go through a whole lot of places, but you can take Philadelphia, 200 years later, 250 years later in the 1700s, where it's got, Quakers and Moravians and Anglicans and proprietors and Jews and slaves and freed slaves all coming together, unlike Boston, which is, very much a Puritan town. And Benjamin Franklin runs away from Boston and goes to Philadelphia. And the word means, city of brotherly love, and realizes that a tolerance for diverse mindsets and diverse backgrounds is an ingredient that leads to a place being a cradle of creativity. Well, for me, that's New Orleans, which for 300 years has had the Huachica Indians and then the French and then the Spanish and then slaves and freed slaves and the Jewish migration in the 1820s and Italians and Germans and now Vietnamese and Hispanics and Latinos. They all come, and this is the most diverse city I've ever lived in. And I grew up in the most diverse neighborhood, racially and economically, I've ever lived in. And that diversity causes some frictions as people rub elbows, but it also causes creativity. And I hate being in a place, and sometimes when I travel, I am, in which everybody looks and thinks like me.
Yeah, definitely. As we, sort of wrestle one culture or one thought against another, there's area for everyone to grow. I love tolerance myself and sharing opinions, without barking over each other. Something that I think I noticed from your book about Elon is that, he's tolerant in certain ways, but he's also very intolerant, or does not have tolerance for other things like people getting in the way of the mission. Is that something that you could elaborate on?
Yeah, I mean, he's mission driven and he can be rough. He runs rough on people, which, as I say, maybe I should learn more of that running CNN. And when you write a book, it's a tale of how certain personality traits cause things to get done, but also how it causes sometimes rubble to fall in the wake of a blown up rocket or a blown up personal relationship. Uh, so I think that's part and parcel of who he is. and it makes him an extremely compelling character, but it also makes him an extremely controversial one. One issue I've had with the book is about a third of the people, in this country just totally hate Elon Musk, and a third of the people think he's can do no wrong and he's an absolute genius. And I've got to be able to say you got to hold both thoughts in your own mind.
Any unexpected events or twists in your life, Walter, that sort of sent you on a different path than you expected?
Well, yeah, I guess a few of them. Let me kind of think. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And sort of, I feel as I hit 70, I'm still wondering what I want to be when I grow up. But I remember talking to Walker Percy, as I said, understanding you could be a writer. And so, in deciding, before I was deciding what I could be when I grew up, I started working as just a copy clerk on the newspaper, the Times Picayune down here, and then did police beat reporting even when I was in high school. And when I got to college, I sent some of my Times Picayune newspaper clips off to this very young hotshot editor named Harry Evans. Some of you will know who he is or was, but he was the new editor of the Sunday Times of London. And out of the blue, I got a telegram. Some of you may remember what a telegram is, while I was at college saying, okay, I'll hire you on a limited basis. And I went over to England and started writing for the Sunday Times of London. It was a total blast being a reporter, but also it had a downside, which is I knew I was more of an observer than a person in the arena. And I ended up being quite successful at moving up in the world of writing and journalism. And I don't think I consciously chose that path. In fact, the there was a week in which I was still working at the Times Picayune and coming out of college. And I got three job offers. One from somebody I'd met in London when I was studying there, uh, offering me to be an agent in the CIA. Another was somebody involved in politics, like running for Congress or something, or somebody was running for Congress, but I would be involved in politics. And the third was an editor from Time magazine who said, come up and work at Time. And I often wonder in the fork of alternate histories, what would have happened if I had become a CIA agent instead? I suspect we would have lost the Cold War, but who knows what life would have been.
Any failures or regrets that have shaped you, Walter?
Yeah, I mean, I failed at CNN. I was, I think, a pretty good editor at Time. I knew everybody there. I could be nice to everybody there because we were rolling in profits and had really great teams of people. And I kind of knew magazines very well. If somebody would say, we can't fit that picture on the spread, I'd say, yes, you can. Crop it this way and run it across the gutter and bleed it off the margins. It'll work. And I knew what I was talking about. I got to CNN. I had no clue what I was talking about. They would talk about, we have to do an uplink with a donut, and Christian Amanpour is going to do the wraparound. And I'm going, what? And also, everybody there was, half of them were driven by ego and wanted that red light to come on so their face would be on TV. And they were pains to deal with. And we did, at first I was foundering, and then 9/11 happened. So we knew what our mission was. And for a year or two, I knew what the mission was. But then CNN needed to be disrupted. Fox News was coming up, MSNBC was coming up. CNN needed to reinvent itself. It needed to fire half the people there. It needed a disruptor. And I failed at that and decided it was time for me to leave. I left on my own volition, went and ran the Aspen Institute. But I consider my time at CNN a cautionary tale of you have to know yourself. And I know that I'm not truly a disruptor. I'm better off, you know, trying to come up with a vision than I am with executing when it comes to managing hundreds or thousands of people.
Thanks for sharing that, Walter. I have two more questions personally that I'd like to ask, and then I'm going to start bringing people up from the audience. So, everyone, please have your questions ready before you request to speak and before you raise your hand. Please let's keep our introduction short so that we can get through as many people as possible, get straight to the question for Walter. Really looking forward to hearing what you guys have to bring up. So, uh, I read on your Wikipedia page, Walter, that you actually served for the Obama administration. Do you have any interesting stories about that?
Um, I served as the head of the thing that ran Voice of America and Radio Free Europe as a chair of that board. And it was actually a whole lot more work than I thought, but it wasn't a full time job. I liked Obama. I often wonder, as I said, the fork in the road of the CIA or Congress or whatever. I often wonder what it would have been like to go into government. And it was one thing I haven't really done other than help chair Voice of America and Radio Free Europe or be the vice chair of the Louisiana Recovery Authority. I've never had a full time job in government. I once, I guess I can tell you exactly when it was because I know the time well. It was August of 2011. President Obama was talking to me about coming in at a very high level position. But that was right when Steve Jobs told me that he was not going to be able to outrun the cancer. And he thought he maybe only had 6 months to live. And I moved back to went to Palo Alto, stayed in his guest house. And I was finishing the book. And I didn't even, it's a very conceited thing to say, which is I felt I couldn't even tell the president. But, I had to not say that Steve Jobs is dying and I need to finish working with him. And so I missed the opportunity to go into the Obama administration.
That's certainly a sacrifice that we can all appreciate. Everyone who has read the Steve Jobs book, I would say that I think that was my first, and after that, I read The Innovators and the Ben Franklin book, and I've just really enjoyed a lot of your work. Which leads me to my next question. I'm personally, as you can tell, working on being the best interviewer that I can and getting the best stories and information out of people that I bring onto spaces. You do just an amazing job evoking information from people and putting stories on paper. Do you have any advice for someone in my shoes on how to ask the right questions and get good information, good stories out of people?
Well, two rules. The shorter the question, the better. And you've been very good at that. I just came off of a podcast where people yammered on and on with their question. Never put a clause in the question, never sort of caveat the question. And sometimes a two-word question is better than a complex question. And secondly, is to listen, because most interviewers don't listen. They have a preset thing of questions, so they don't react or interact. And I guess I'll do a third that applies to Elon Musk. And it was the secret I discovered in getting him to talk, which was don't fill the silences. Sometimes I would ask Elon a question. Sometimes it would be a question, maybe a place he didn't want to go. It would be a simple question, like, tell me about your father. And I'd pushed on that door dozens of times and then he wouldn't open it. And then one night I said, let me ask you again, tell me about your father. And there was a long silence. And I tell you, it may have been 2, 3, 4 minutes. That's a long time. And I learned just to stay silent. And sometimes he processes information and then more slowly he processes emotions. And you just got to let that processing work. It's almost like a batch processing for those who remember what that was, one thing at a time. And so I would never, and I'd watch people, including, well, I won't say some names, but people came in and people he hired, and they'd be in the conference room and they'd ask something, and Elon would be very quiet. And they'd leap in and they'd fill the silences. And I'd almost want to write a note saying, don't fill the silences.
Wow, thank you, Walter. That's amazing advice. I really appreciate that. AJ, I'm going to pass the mic to you. Let you ask any questions that you've come up with throughout the interview, and then we'll move on to some of the folks that we brought up to the speaker panel.
That might be Penny practicing the silence.
Silences don't really work well on podcasts. I'm just talking about when you're reporting a story and have a notebook in front of you. All right, I'm not hearing a speaker.
Yeah, so he might
A-
be having some trouble, I guess. I'm guessing right now. So I see we have a
A-
hand up. So I'm going to request R
AJ,
to
can
go
you
ahead and
not
ask your
hear
question or
Walter?
comment.
I think
AJ,
that the mantra of the past few years has been unmute yourself, hit your unmute button.
all right. Let's go to Dustin. Dustin, you want to ask a
Yeah, sorry,
question?
you can go ahead and unmute unmute, and please go ahead with your question.
Perfect. Penny, thank you
I
so
think
much. Walter, wow, absolute gold. I'm going to write down everything you just said. I like to interview people. We have a podcast, and that was really valuable for me. I wanted to ask you about being a dad. I know you have a daughter that you're very proud of. She's a journalist. She's incredible. Have you had a chance to collaborate with your daughter? Have you been able to work with her all with some of your stuff?
I think I'll give you her text number and you can text her. We've tried a couple of things I wanted to collaborate on. One, I did collaborate on a bit, which is I think Penny said he had read The Innovators, which makes him one of about 27 people in this world, but it was one of my favorite books. And it's about how the digital revolution came to be. And the framing device, the first chapter and the last chapter in particular, is about Ada Lovelace, who was Lord Byron's daughter, and her mother, Lady Byron, wanted to make sure she wasn't like Lord Byron, so had her tutored in mathematics so she wouldn't become a poet. But she developed what she was called poetical science. And she helped figure out that you could use the punch cards that were being used to make beautiful patterns on the looms in England in the 1840s and use them with a calculating machine to be able to process anything that could be notated in symbols, words, music, numbers, i.e., invents the computer and the algorithm concept. And my daughter had written about her, and my daughter was fascinated about her. So I worked with Betsy on the Ada Lovelace parts of that book. We have two or three collaborations we keep talking about doing, but she's into sort of a type of history like, I don't know, the 1150s and the women who ran Europe for their ne'er do well king husbands, and like Anne of Cleve. And it's not exactly my type of history, but now that this book is done, I plan to rope her in and we'll see if we can collaborate.
What a joy. That is so cool to hear. Well, thanks for answering my question. I appreciate it, Walter.
Thanks, Dustin. Let's go next to R.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me here. Any great space, Walter. I love the book. What I love most was that it forced me to face some things and some internal biases in an objective way that I had myself. My question is when you were writing the book, what is there something that sticks out in your mind that you struggled with the most while trying to write it?
I think the rapid mood swings that Elon went through, which in some ways mirrored the almost Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde like personality his father had, where he would sometimes be, funny and do engineering things, and then sometimes just go cold and berate people. And I found it uncomfortable where I'd be sitting at a meeting or walking an assembly line, and everything would be jovial and fun. And then, for understandable reasons, sometimes Elon would get triggered by something. And it was almost like those of us who live down here watching a storm cloud coming in off the Gulf of Mexico. He said, "Uh-oh, we're going to go into a dark mode here." So I also had to learn not only how to deal with it, which is, to remain very fact driven and in anything you say, but also how some people, and this is a thing you'll see in the book, it's a sub theme of the dozen or so people who had to, I mean, there were 50 or 60 that I saw, but I pick about a dozen who have to deal with him when he goes into these dark modes. And about half are successful and learn how to deal with it and get promoted, and half get burned out. And I wanted to show that as part of the narrative.
Thank you, Walter, and thanks for the great question, R. Let's see, Catherine, please join the discussion.
Thank you so much. Really interesting. I have a bias because I also am an interviewer, so I'm very interested in how other people do this. So my question is, in particular, and I think that will reveal some of my own struggles, is that um, one thing that you do very well in your work, because you're able to sort of gain the trust and be inside with these people, you're able to, perhaps get some information or details that are emotional or personal that um, might be difficult to deal with sometimes. So I'm wondering, when you write, is there any element where you're feeling unsure whether you can share this or anything that you keep away from the public eye? How do you get to the point where you can be so absolutely honest in your writing about the situation? And is there anything that you hold back?
Yeah, great question. And Elon pushed me to be as honest and transparent as possible. So there are things in the book, including about the design of the global next generation car, or transforming full self-drive from being an algorithm rules-based to being a machine learning-based neural network, that are almost, were not public, but he said, fine, do it. Then let's get to the other extreme, which is personal things, family, children, whatever. I'm very cautious about that. I made a bit of a mistake, or a real mistake, in the Steve Jobs book by putting in just a few paragraphs involving his children who are under the age of 18, and I don't, and talking about his relationship and his feelings about them and things he said to me about them. And my wife berated me, said, you got to balance how much hurt it could give, especially to an innocent young person who didn't ask to be on the stage, versus how necessary it is to the reader. So I tried very hard in this book to be open and honest about things. For example, Siobhan and Elon have twins, Azure and Strider. I don't think they had ever been seen before. And at one point, I'm with them, if you've gotten near the end of the book. And I said, do you mind if I take a picture? And do you mind if I mention them and do it? And they said, fine, we'd rather it come out this way. Likewise, Claire Boucher, Grimes, and Elon said it was fine to talk about their third child, Tao, that they wanted to come out in a book in context, not in some tabloid. So that was done with permission. The more complicated thing were the teenage kids of Musk, with Justine, his first wife. And the more complicated of all was the eldest, who transitions and is now Jenna, and rejected her last name. And that's key to understanding some things in the book, but I didn't want to violate her sensitivities and privacy. And to be honest about it, I'll probably go too far, but I talked to people like Kimball and Kimball's wife and others and said, okay, what do you think would be harmful? What do you think would be hurtful? What's appropriate? And there were things that they suggested weren't necessary in the book. I also talked to Griffin, uh, another the older of the teens, and he said he was fine being in the book. I could take his picture. He allowed me to be quoted. And we even talked about Saxon, this beautiful, wise, charming uh, son who has autism. And I was careful, even consulting with Justine, the mother. And then the two other kids really did not want to be in the book, and so they aren't, including pictures of them. There was, some pictures that had been tweeted out publicly of them, like with the Pope, and they just didn't like that. And I decided, no, that's not necessary for the reader. I'm going to respect, especially younger people, I'm going to respect their privacy as much as possible and 10% more than might be good, because I'd rather err on the side of being respectful to them than err on the side of causing, hurt.
Wow, thank you, Walter. Very insightful answer. Let's see, AJ, I think your system is probably working a little better now. If you have a question, please ask and then pass the mic to someone else.
Yeah, sure. Walter, beyond pleasure to be here. And I'm just soaking it all in that you're sharing. I particularly, as I was doing some research to join as a co-host for this space with you, I've been watching your interviews lately a lot and your conversations with others, and I'm finding that there's something very approachable about you that is very captivating and inspirational for me, especially when you are very open about your failures and your setbacks and you share those. I'm curious to know if what have been some of your foundational learnings and beliefs that have shaped your life that made you the person you are today? And perhaps if you do get a do-over, which no one does, but if you did, what were things that you think you would do different or something on those lines? I'd love to hear.
I think one foundational belief is to know myself and what I'm good and bad at, such as managing a major cable news network. It's not my strength. And then translating that into saying, well, what can I do that might be useful to inspire generations of people to be uh, more mission driven? And whether it's Ben Franklin or Jennifer Doudna or Elon Musk, that's a foundational belief. Also, a belief in a certain tolerance, which is I'm not supposed to impose my views on others. And that's too common in journalism today, that people have an agenda or they're pushing something. I believe we're all better off if we get information that may not be totally right, but the person who's gathering it is going out there and working and staying up at night and watching, and then trying to get the closest approximation of the truth without being agenda driven. And that is something our democracy and our civic life is missing these days. And I wish I could restore a little bit more civility, not only to our discourse, but to our information flow.
Yeah, thank you for that, Walter. But I do have a quick follow-up, if I may ask real quick. Or is there been anything that you think that stands out for you as something you've taken from either Elon or your past work that you feel, oh gosh, I wish I had that ability or desire or drive? Anything particular?
Well, as I said earlier, if I had a do-over, I certainly wouldn't have taken the CIA job. But if I had the do-over, I would have studied physics, math, and biology in a serious fashion rather than just a few courses, both in college and in graduate school.
Thank you, Walter. I'm going to turn over to my answers and then we go to Lucky after that.
Thank you. Thank you, Penny and AJ. Can you hear me okay? Or am I choppy? Okay.
But here you're fine.
It's a pleasure to speak with you, Walter, and your book on Elon. And I also read the Steve Jobs biography. You were wonderful. I had wanted to hear what your perspective was on how Elon plans on, or what his ideas are around making AI safe, like what his thoughts were on how to do that. And that's it.
As I said, it arose from reading the Asimov books and others, where you have to have Asimov's rules of robotics. The zeroth law, I think, is, no robot shall harm humanity, and you have to program that in. And so he was very interested when Demis Hassabis, as I say in the book, there's a great scene, I think, talks to Demis, who's who created DeepMind, which is machine learning. I mean, it's the one that does AlphaGo and those type of things. And Elon invests in it and then becomes angry or worried when Google is trying to buy DeepMind. And Elon was very close to Larry Page. I often think of Elon as the world's richest couch surfer because he would stay, instead of going to a hotel or having a house in Palo Alto, he would stay with Larry Page. And they'd stay up at night and debate whether or not there was a danger from artificial intelligence. And Page took the exact opposite approach. Like, well, maybe the robots will leave us behind and they'll have consciousness, but we shouldn't we shouldn't be speciest. We shouldn't care just about human species. If there's a new level of consciousness, that's good. And Musk was more appalled and said, well, I do favor the human consciousness and I'm going to fight for that. So he tried to prevent the sale of DeepMind to Google and failed. So he starts OpenAI with Sam Altman. And eventually, that doesn't really work out. OpenAI was supposed to be a nonprofit with open source. And eventually it morphs into having a for-profit arm and a relationship with Microsoft. And so Musk, near the end of the book, you'll see I think, as I say, Twitter's not the most important part of his legacy. It's not in the top 4 or 5. And he says to me, you should come to Austin again. I was already writing the book and back here. I have something I want to tell you. And I don't want to do it on the phone. And it was, maybe I'm spending too much time thinking about other things and Twitter's taking too much of a mind share, or X.com is. But I'm now going to focus on starting an AI company. And his concept of AI is that it's not just large language model, generative, predictive, text-based stuff like the chat bots we're all yammering about these days. He says that's fine, but we have to have real world AI, artificial general intelligence, in which we have artificial intelligence that can process not just language, but visual data, video from Tesla cameras, billions of frames per week from Tesla cameras, or Optimus the robot. And the next wave of true artificial general intelligence will be robots that can navigate the factory floor or navigate the surface of bars or the French Quarter of New Orleans, and cars that can drive themselves. And I watched him create Optimus the robot, especially bringing his son X there and touching the hands of Optimus. You'll see it in the book. And how we have to make sure that the robot is a little bit smaller than us so it won't overwhelm us, that it has a fixed speed, that it can't go faster, so it can't outrun us, that it has an off switch, which is something that's been a great philosophical debate in the AI alignment world. Can you actually make an off switch that can't be overridden? But he really cares about these things.
Thank you, Walter. I noticed that it's 10:59 now, my time. We originally arranged for 1 hour, and I have 38 requests for people that haven't even been brought
I
up yet.
don't
So I
know.
want to be.
Can you extend it? Can you extend it, or is
I
that
sure can. Yeah,
extend
it's
it?
not going to expire. Okay,
Okay.
great. So we'll at least try to make it through the hands that are already up. I wanted to ask you how much time you have, and if I should give people hope by inviting more people up to the stage, or
Let's do. If you have 30 hands, we definitely don't have that much time, but I'll make my answers shorter. But yeah, let's go through them, and I'll try to be more succinct.
well, we love your stories. So by all means, that's what we're all here for. I'll try to get through as many of these hands as I can. So AJ, if someone has already asked a question, please remove them from the speakers and start adding some additional people. I think you already promised Lucky the next spot, so we'll go to Lucky. And after Lucky, let's please go Ani. You can ask your question next.
Well, thank you kindly, sirs, ladies and gentlemen of the audience, and animals that might be listening, or other things from other universes, eventually through time and all history. As Macroney said, it will eventually cross oceans, and those oceans may be star gaps. I am so grateful to be here and grateful to be witnessing these events. Walter, thank you so much for sharing your inspiring story. My father was a great man and left me the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin to read as a child before he left me. And he was excuse me, I'm getting emotional. He was an engineer like your father and inspired many people. Built boilers for people to heat their homes with in-floor heating back when wood stoves were a thing. And in Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, he heated schools that way with having a boiler on one end with a wood-heated cowled boiler that forced the air throughout the school, and they would open the windows in the far end of the school to allow that heat to blow right through the school and heat the whole end of the building. Far better man than a lot of people that sat around eating and drinking. My question, though, is what's your favorite food and drink when you are at your leisure? Thank you for...
Tomorrow night, since I've been away and I missed my wife's birthday a couple days ago because I was up in Boston, we have a tradition called date night. And we go to Galatoire's in the French Quarter, and it's just the two of us. And we sit in a table in the downstairs room near the back, and we have a Gulf fish, either pompano or redfish, with crab meat on top. And I usually start with shrimp remoulade. So that's my favorite meal and dish, and I'm having it tomorrow night.
Could you please post a picture on X of that? I would love to see it. I really would love to even experience that for myself.
There's a Financial Times article called Lunch With, where they have a lunch every Saturday. They do a piece called Lunch With. And Jillian Tett, who is a Financial Times correspondent, did me at Galatoire's about 4 weeks ago. So if you go Financial Times, Galatoire's, my name, you'll see the article about me having a meal at Galatoire's.
Well, bless your golden heart, and thank you again, Penny, for having this beautiful space, AJ for co-hosting, and everyone else for being here, listening, and sharing it. It is so cool. Keep sharing, keep inspiring others. I love inspiring creative content and others.
Thank you, Lucky.
I'll jump down here and let somebody else.
Thank you, Lucky. Appreciate it. Let's
Cheers.
try to get through as many people as we can. That was a great story, but I definitely want to give Walter and as many people as much time to speak as we can. So, Ani, your question, please.
Hey, Penny, thank you. I just wanted to make sure everybody can hear me okay first.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you so much for bringing me up and for giving me the opportunity to actually directly speak to Walter. And this has been an incredible space. The questions that you've been asking have been incredible. And Walter, it is such an honor to be up here to speak to you. I had a simple question, but I kind of just wanted to ask, how do you pick the individuals that you choose to write about? What are the aspects that maybe it's about their personality, or is it their career that actually interests you into picking that person that you write about? And if I may ask, who's your favorite among all of the people that you've written about so far?
It's like saying who are your favorite children. There are different times, different ways. The most interesting and compelling, of course, was Elon Musk. I tend to choose people not because they're smart, because smart people are a dime a dozen. I choose people because they're creative and sometimes disruptive. They think different, as Steve Jobs would say. And if you look at all of the characters I've done, they were the ones who affected this. They rippled history because they thought out of the box.
That's a beautiful answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ani. Thank you, Walter. Let's go to Sega next.
Thanks. Thanks, Penny, for bringing me up, and great work you're doing here off on X. I also need to reiterate the appreciation of Sir Walter Isaacson, whose contribution to our world inspires and influences my work and purpose as a person. I know Elon has established XAI, with a focus on ethical deployment and the advocacy on regulation. I'm also aware that large language models are pretty much text-based logic calculators that is yet to feel, regardless of the training data. And Elon has stated earlier the growing concern of China precisely on the possibility of being subservient to a digital superintelligence. Do you, sir, envisage that at some point AI may become sentient? And how close are we to this based on your interaction with Elon? Thank you very much. I really appreciate this.
I hate to tell you this, but one of the things you have to learn in life is to say, I don't know. And clearly, the question of consciousness, which Elon and I talked about at length, and you'll see in the book, which is related to the question of sentience, is something that no philosopher, even Descartes, ever truly wrestled to the ground. The Turing test is something that now our chatbots could probably pass, but that doesn't get you anywhere towards the question of true consciousness. And I, not being interested in my opinion, but in Elon's, would say he feels that human consciousness is unique, not something that will be replicated in machines in the same way. And since we've not made contacts with any alien consciousness, it may be unique in the universe. And I think that's what drives him, is this notion that the human form of consciousness has something unique to it that is not replicable in a silicon-based circuitry type system.
Thank you, Sega. Jay, I think you've had your hand up for a long time now. Please join the
Thank
discussion.
you guys. Penny, AJ, you guys are beautiful as always, and have asked some amazing questions. And I definitely, had a couple of questions when I came up here, and I've been thinking about this premise for a minute. Over the years, I've seen a lot of people kind of clickbait people by saying, if you had 3 minutes in an elevator with Steve Jobs, what are you going to say? Or 3 minutes with Elon Musk, go, right? And so I've never seen the perfect question, right? I've never seen like the thing. It's like, yeah, that's it. That's what you do. That's what we should all do. So my question for Walter, and Walter, I appreciate your grace. You're an amazing human that has inspired so many people, and you continue to do so. And so my question is for all the people in the audience that aren't going to get to ask the question. You have spent 3 minutes in an elevator with those two and many more, influential people. So if you could just say, look, there is no perfect question, but this is what you should know after all the time I've spent and all the things I've written about. Like, what is it that we should know in the audience, or maybe the people that feel like they're a little less significant than some of the heroes that you write about and that we talk about. So kind of like I'm just asking for your perspective after all the time you've spent. What is it that we should know, if you could?
That's a broad question. And often I say one thing you should know is when people ask questions like that, it's always good to say, let me tell you a story, because that's the way we convey our things. And for me, the story is when I was covering politics for the first time for Time Magazine, New Hampshire primary. And most of the press would sit around the bar and influence each other's thinking. But there were a group of great journalists, Tim Russert among them, who kept saying, we're going to go door knocking. And door knocking meant you just walk up in neighborhoods and knock on somebody's door and listen to them about what's happening. And I discovered that you don't want to ask any leading questions. You don't want to have any premises to your questions. And that the best question I could ask is, what's up? Tell me what's happening. What are you feeling? And that would cause people to go in a direction that would be more interesting.
What's up? That's like just the most basic of questions, but it leaves everything open to interpretation. And that's Great advice, Walter. I think if we're going in order here, Coop has probably been waiting the longest. Coop, what question do you have?
Hey, Walter. I know that we haven't crossed paths at Starbase yet, but I know you've got to meet my good friend Nick Answeeney, Austin DeSisto, and I've only heard good things. But I guess my question is, I'm a filmmaker down here at Starbase, and we're really just trying to record history and to preserve the memory of how we left this planet. My question is, how do you get to the crux of the story, which is not like a passive thing? You really have to put effort into like getting to the core of a story. How do you do that without, I guess, like disrupting the moment, like at least as little as you can?
Yeah, that's sort of the Heisenberg question, which is when you're observing a particle, sometimes the observation tends to affect either the velocity or the position of the particle. And you have to be careful to avoid the Heisenberg problem and to be as much in the corner as possible, to be as inconspicuous as possible. And I think I was able to do that. I did not feel when I was with Musk and you can ask the people at Starbase, ask Bill Riley or Mark Juncosa or Gwen Shotwell or some of the others. How did I try to just listen without influencing the narrative? And also, it's important to understand the complexity of the narrative. One of the last scenes in the book is Starship being sent up. And you'll even see pictures, because I took pictures in there with X and Griffin, but Elon sitting there at the console in the command room. And it goes up. It's up there quite a while, 3 minutes, and then blows up. And there's a complexity in that. I had people call me up and say, "Oh man, that's horrible. It's a bad ending for your book," or, "Oh, that's." I said, "No, this is how rockets eventually get to orbit, and this is how Elon Musk eventually becomes successful. He pulls the trigger, he shoots things up. Sometimes there's rubble in the wake, but eventually the rocket's in orbit." And so I tried to keep that mindset at all times, especially down when I loved it. I'm sorry I didn't run across you, but I was in one of those Airstream trailers right near where his home is. And I just loved being down there. It was the coolest experience I had, far better than being in a conference room in Twitter headquarters.
Yep, it's a special place down here.
I
Thanks,
saw
Coop.
Nick and Austin in Boston. I don't know if you saw that. I saw them about 3 days ago. They met me in Cambridge, Mass, and we had a grand old time. They
That was
posted
awesome.
pictures. Yeah.
Well, I hope sometime I get a chance to sit down with you, Walter. So far, this has been amazing. We're about 15 minutes over. I just want to remind you of that, so I'm mindful of your time.
Let's do a couple
Melly,
more.
Hi guys.
great,
Hi Walter.
great.
It's great to meet you. I just have a quick question. Because you have so much experience in writing various types of material, what's your or some advice for authors and writers that are still finding their feet?
I guess I'd go back to the original I said at the beginning of this, which is you can decide to be a preacher or you can decide to be a storyteller. Nowadays, whether it's book writing or journalism, everybody's on a high horse. They're all enraged about something, and they're all trying to slam you with their opinions. I guess one of the criticisms I've gotten in this book is I didn't slam everybody with my opinion. I didn't, try to come down hard on Elon or something like some of my old-fashioned media friends would have wanted, or I didn't try to canonize them. I didn't canonize them or demonize them. I figure you got to respect the reader, and you got to say, I'm going to give you the facts. And within the facts and within the narrative, there are going to be some moral threads, just like there are in the story of Adam and Eve, or in Shakespeare's Measure for Measure, or in Homer's The Odyssey. But the main thing is going to be me relating the story, not me hammering you with my opinions.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
All right, a good last question here.
Okay, last question then goes to Blaze. Blaze has been up with her hand patiently waiting.
Hey, thanks, Penny. Thanks, AJ. And hello, Walter. I'm so glad to be among some beautiful individuals. But I, considering the amount of time that you spent with Elon, I was wondering if you can kind of share an experience that was kind of thrilling or exciting or that kind of made you say to yourself, wow, this is an incredible time to be alive.
I guess, you know, among the most inspiring times was even that launch I just talked about. I think at the very end of the book, in which we're at Starbase, and after an aborted takeoff attempt on a Monday night, and then he goes and meets Linda Yaccarino and hires her to run Twitter, and he comes back, and we're in the control room, and there's the countdown. There are 33 Raptor engines, as all of you know, on the base of the booster. And you could tell 2 or 3 engines by the time we were within 1 minute of launch seemed to have some problems with them. Weren't sure, could be some leakage. And Elon has to make a calculation. And I think Mark Jancosa and the launch director both look at him, and he kind of nods. He said, "Yeah, we're gonna do it. We know that it may not now work perfectly, but we're gonna learn from launching it." And he nods, and it launches. And I remember going up, and you see the picture in the book of him watching it on the screen with his hands on his head. I'm just standing back there with Griffin and X and a few others, Antonio Gracias. And I'm deeply inspired, not simply because he's made a rocket that has launched and it's the biggest movable object ever made by humans, but that he was a risk taker, a total risk taker. And it does, as you know, uh, explode after a while, after a few minutes. And instead of being upsetting, that added to the notion that we used to be a nation of risk takers. We used to shoot people up to the moon and do space shuttles. Any of us almost who came to this country, whenever our families came, whether they came on the Mayflower or from fleeing oppression in Europe or across the Rio Grande, took risks. And I remember that night sitting there, there's sort of a tiki bar area next to the headquarters, the building of Starbase. And there's sort of a party. I mean, it's not totally jubilant, but it's pretty happy. And little X is there, May is there, other people are there. And I'm watching X, and he's dancing around with rockets, but also some ways putting things in the fire pit. And I don't try to interfere on things, but I'm looking, thinking, all right, should I save this kid? And then, is this kid going to burn his hand? And Elon said, when I was a kid, I was told, don't play with matches. So I immediately went behind a tree with a box of matches and played with them. And I thought, okay, one generation of risk seekers training the next. We probably should be inspired by that as well. We need guardrails in our lives. We need regulators. We need referees. We need people who say, don't do that. But maybe we've got too many of those these days. And I love being able to end the book, not with an amazing success of a rocket that gets to orbit and lands and everything else, but a rocket that took risks and helped move us just one step, not 100 steps, just one step closer to being a spacefaring civilization. So that's the way I end the book, and that's the way I think I'll end this podcast.
Wow, Walter, that is such a poignant note to end. And I think what a great question to end with as well. So thank you, Blaze. Thank you to everyone that joined the stage. Thank you, AJ, for co-hosting. Especially thank you, Walter. I know your time is highly sought after, and I feel extremely honored to get an hour and 20 minutes with you. So thank you so much for that. AJ, you have any parting notes before we say bye to everyone?
Well, just nothing but the most gratitude for you, Walter, and for Penny, for you to put this together and for everyone to show up. Walter, I want to say one of the things that struck me the most in one of your recent interviews with Lex, you mentioned if people really want to listen if you feel like you want to talk, and I feel that's the story of X, and that's the story of Spaces right now. It is so important in today's time for people to listen and for people to talk. So I feel this platform and this medium is a new direction for which I'm 100% supporting and I'm supportive of. So I thank you so much for being the storyteller you are. You are inspiring us all.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Walter. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to close the space and share it for your friends. So if anyone missed it, they can listen to the recording. Definitely, this is one of my best. And yeah, thanks again, Walter. I can't thank you enough. Bye, everyone.